So let's say that you're in that situation, and at the end of the year, all of a sudden they cut the funding, you turn in your receipts. Are they still obligated to fulfill that? Or do we not know at this point?
Legally, the answer is yes, but there's a very big difference between what is legally required and what actually happens. We went to the legislators in a professional manner and said, our two organizations represent over 75% of all children protective services in the state of Illinois. We are ceasing our operations effective today. And one thing that legislators don't like is negative press. Amazingly, the money showed up the next week.
Are you stressed about the state of government funding? Then welcome to Nonprofit Docs. I'm your host, Dr. Marc Hardy, and this is part two of our continued conversation with fundraising expert Mark Germano. Mark has more than 40 years' experience in the nonprofit sector, and he's helped nonprofits raise over $750 million. Yeah, you heard me right. He's taught fundraising at the University of Notre Dame, where he and I met more than 15 years ago. Now we're going to talk about the current ups and downs of federal and state and local government funding. As we record this in March of 2025, hundreds of millions of dollars in grants from the government are getting cut, especially the federal government, which often gives block grants to states who then give block grants to cities and counties. It kind of flows down from the federal government. I just saw the other day that one department is getting about $500 million cut from their budget in research funds. The science foundations, the NSF, the National Institutes of Health have had significant cuts in funding, even for research that's already going on. We're talking about cancer research, heart research, research for children's diseases, you name it. And I can't imagine being one of these organizations who is so very reliant on government funding. And having taught at 3 universities, I know that a lot of these grants, especially in the sciences and in education, they come from the federal government. Why? Because, well, they're the biggest funders. So, Mark, you have dealt with these organizations that are dependent on government grants for many, many years. So, I'm asking you, how do we deal with this? How do we buffer ourselves in this storm? I don't know. So, I defer to your wisdom.
There's a little saying that I have: friends first, funding follows. So you want to create relationships with your public funding sources as well as your foundation, corporation, and individual funding sources. The other thing that's true of government funding in general is the farther away you are from the decision makers, the slower the process takes. So, for example, you and I, Mark, we've done a lot of work in South Bend. So I work with a food preservation organization in South Bend. If the city of South Bend wants to donate a parcel of land to this organization, it's basically a phone call and a meeting with a city councilman or city council. They vote on it, and probably within 60 days, that decision's made. And the parcel of land is either donated or they'll say, hey, we'll sell it to you for $1, right? Start to finish, right? Okay, if you take that to the county, you're probably going to add another 30 days to it. So now you're talking about 90 days. Okay, but now let's say you want to go to the state of Indiana. Well, it depends on when that happened, when they're at in their legislative cycle. It could be anywhere from 6 months to a year. So let's say it's on the 6 month side. So the decision is made at the 6 month point. Yes, we're going to do this. But then somebody's got to send the notice out. Somebody's got to notify that this has happened. That's going to add another month or 2 months. All right. Now let's go to the big kahuna, your favorite uncle and mine, Uncle Sam, right? These are block grants, typically large blocks of money. And block grants were created during the Nixon administration because just got tired of sending out all these little, what they considered little checks. They were probably hundreds of millions of dollars, but they were kind of irritating. So let's just make it one big block, and we'll say the state of Indiana or the state of Ohio or wherever, whatever state it is. Here, you got this block of money. Tell us how you spent it. All right. Because the headlines say, oh, the National Science Foundation is going to get cut $500 million. That's what somebody in the administration of the federal government has said. To this day, the legislature, the Congress and the Senate still hold the purse strings. And there's currently some discussion, argument, court cases where the federal court and the federal Supreme Court have said, you can't do that. You can't turn off the money. So let's just say the headline is true. $500 million is going to be cut from the National Science Foundation. That's what the administration wants to do. Okay. Well, it's now got to go over to the Appropriations Committee in Congress and the Senate. And they've got to do whatever they're going to do. And it doesn't matter if the Republicans propose it, the Democrats will oppose it. If the Democrats proposed it, the Republicans are going to oppose it. So they're going to go back and forth and back and forth. And then they got to compromise and come to an agreement. And then they have to implement it, right? So because we're here in the Midwest physically, and the decisions are made in Washington, D.C., it's going to take time for those decisions, once they're agreed to and implemented by the legislature, it's going to take time for that to impact your receivables. So let's say you're getting $10,000 a month from the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. to do X, okay? The announcement's made today, we're cutting, $500 million. You're probably talking about somewhere between 9 to 12 months until that $10,000 a month disappears from your checking account. Now, let's just assume the federal government is super efficient at making this decision and implementing this decision. You still got about 6 months before it actually happens and affects your checking account. Now, somebody's going to be watching this podcast and they're going to say, you know what? It happened to me in 3 days. There's always exceptions to the rule.
Sure,
But
right.
I'm just kind of giving you a general perspective.
Well, let me ask you this because, we're talking about it could take 6 months to a year for the funding to actually stop. But my experience with federal grants, especially, is the drawdown system,
Yep,
where you get the grant,
yep,
and then they say at the end of the year, you turn in what you spent, and we will reimburse you.
yep,
Right?
yep.
So some of the big ones that I've dealt with, they're like, okay, we're going to give you $1 million or $1.5 million, but every year you have to turn in your receipts, and then you let us know what you did, and then we will reimburse you for that. So that means you got to have the money up front to even
Mm-hmm.
do the program before the
Yep.
government reimburses you. So let's say that you're in that situation, and at the end of the year, all of a sudden they cut the funding, you turn in your receipts. Are they still obligated to fulfill that, or do we not know at this point?
Legally, the answer is yes, but there's a very big difference between what's what is legally required and what actually happens. When I worked in the state of Illinois, the two largest providers of child protective services. Now, these are children who have been beaten, they've been neglected. These are terrible, terrible cases. I worked for Lucent Social Services. The largest provider of child protective services was Catholic Charities. Number two was the Lutheran Social Services. The state of Illinois had contracts with our two organizations saying you're going to provide this many days of service, this level of service, etc. You bill us after you've incurred the expenses.
Mhm.
And I've seen this happen in good economic times and bad economic times. In good economic times, they're slow to reimburse you. So we
Okay.
had to have somewhere around 45 to 90 days of cash flow, right? On bad economic times, it stretched out, at least in the state of Illinois, to over a year.
So politics
So
could interfere with this too, right? I
big
mean,
time, big
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Because so what Catholic Charities and Lutheran Social Services did together is they went to first to the administrators of the money and say, hey, we don't have 9 to 12 months of cash flow, so we can't do this. And the administrators, they don't want to go back to the legislators and say, hey, turn on the money because we got people like, right? So nothing was happening. So then we went to the legislators and we went to the legislators in a professional manner and said, dear state senator, dear state congressman, all of you, it was a joint session. Our two organizations represent over 75% of all children protective services in the state of Illinois. We are ceasing our operations effective today.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I got some
So,
attention.
oh, yeah. It was on in the print media because there were still newspapers at the time, radio, television. And one thing that legislators don't like is negative press. And now you're talking about children and children in very vulnerable, desperate situations. Amazingly, the money showed up the next week.
Yeah.
So,
What's amazing about this, we're in 2025 and there's all this talk about cutting funding, and people are already saying you're cutting funding for cancer research, for children who have terrible diseases, for research into heart disease and Alzheimer's. These are pressing concerns. And so they're already bringing that to the media's attention. And I would assume partly because it's true, but the other part is the media pressure, right? The
oh,
public
yeah.
pressure, and
Oh, yeah.
politicians do not like to be put in a bad light. So that's a great strategy, right?
Yeah. And I'm not recommending at all that you go to, thermonuclear device strategies.
Right.
Start again, friends first, funding
Mhm.
will follow. So
Yeah.
if you have a relationship with your city, county, state, or federal funding source,
Mhm.
the legislatures do their thing, but there's staff people, there's administrative people who actually execute them. Those are the people that you really need to know. And you need to get to know them as well as possible. So, what works best is a face, face to face.
Mhm.
So if you're in the state and you know that Mary Brown is the administrator, go see her. Go see her. I'm telling you, if it's important to your organization and it's a significant chunk of your budget, get in your car and go see her and
What's
explain
amazing
your.
about that is most of the government grants that I have dealt with, on the RFP, the request for proposal, they have a contact name with a phone number and an email, right? So it isn't like you have to search this person out. Now they may
There it
change,
is.
but the fact is you have that person there. And the fact is they want to expend this money because if they don't, the next year they won't have a budget,
Right.
right? They
That's
want to
right.
get this money out there.
That's right.
So I think that's a great strategy. I mean, let's face it, the government, they're still people
Right.
when it comes down to it, right?
Right.
Well, listen, I think we need to do a whole program on federal funding because I know that one of the problems is that people become dependent on it. They get a little lazy. They don't go out and develop donors. They don't go out and talk to foundations. So I think we need to go a little bit deeper into that. And if our listeners want us to go deeper, we could do another hour, hour and a half. We could do a whole course on it, in fact, because there's a lot involved in getting government funding that is very different from getting foundation funding
Yeah.
or donors.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
could do a whole thing. But thank you for your input on that. Anything you
And
want to
Mark,
add? Yeah.
yeah, Mark, if I would, so here's a suggestion. So you've been notified. Hey, we're cutting your funding. Okay,
Yeah.
so you know that there's going to be time involved, right? Here's a very simple thing you can start right now. Whether you're the executive director or whatever, find your list of current donors. Go out and buy first class stamps, note cards, and an envelope, and get a blue ballpoint pen. Don't get a
Flow.
marker
Yeah.
or yeah, don't get that because go get the 29-cent ballpoint pens. Why? because the ink isn't that good and you have to press down on the paper to make it happen. So your donor knows that a real human being wrote this note
This
and
wasn't
signed
a
it,
this wasn't a mass-produced note.
not a mass produced thing, right?
Yeah.
And just start really simple. Write 2 notes in the morning, 2 notes in the afternoon,
Mhm.
right? And just say, and I'll pretend I'm writing to you, dear Mark, just wanted to know we greatly appreciate your support. Hope all is well. Sincerely, right? Don't ask them for money. Don't get complicated. Just a simple thank you note. Hey, we appreciate everything you've done. We want to stay in touch with you. Or, hey, Mark, it's springtime. I hope you're having a great day. My flowers are blooming. Simple. Just make it a simple. You do 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and you discipline yourself to do that. That's 20 in a week. That's 80 in a month. Most nonprofit organizations have somewhere between 800 to 2,000 donors.
Mhm.
So one person being disciplined about doing 80 a month, that's 960 thank you notes in a year. It's simple. You can start now, and donors will remember that. So when you come back to them 6 months or 9 months later, when the money from either the federal government or state government has been shut off, you could start the conversation saying, "Well, we got some bad news, and we're hoping you could help us." Right? But if you wait until the day after the money starts and say, "We need money," yeah,
Too late.
too
Well,
late.
I've worked with several nonprofits that have had this problem of losing federal funding, and all of a sudden they're like, let's go write a grant proposal and get $1 million. That doesn't work. But if you paid attention to your donor base and you treated them well, I think that strategy works. And one actually took their board of directors and said, okay, you got to help us raise money. Of course, the board of directors was like, nobody wants to raise money. But what they said is, no, we want you to pick up the phone and either call a donor and thank them for their support. You don't ask them for money, or write them a note, like you said, in your handwriting, and thank them. And they at their board meetings, the first half hour, that's what they did. They would either write a note or they would get on their phones.
Yep.
And within a month, they had contacted every donor and they had enforced those relationships. So I think that's a great idea. So thank you. We're now that we're talking about this, let's go to segment 3 of our conversation. What should we be doing now to build relationships with donors so that down the road, when this multi-trillion-dollar amount of money is transferred and it's falling on our heads and we're going, now what? That we're ready for that. What do we, generally, how do we communicate and
Mhm.
build relationships with foundations or donors, but especially in light of our uncertainty and the fact that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, the money coming into the nonprofit sector is going to be insane, and we have to
Yep.
prepare for that. What do we do now? If you want to know how we can build relationships with our donors to tap into the $13 trillion that will be given to charitable causes over the next several years, click here for part 3 of our conversation with Mark Germano.